You. Good morning, John, or good afternoon. How are you?
Hi Neil, how are you?
Good, thank you. John, I wanted to ask you about just your philosophy in terms of picking a roster for Tuesday's game. Do you go with sort of your cup lineup, giving players who perhaps haven't been playing as much a chance to play, or as you get deeper in the competition, and with say a player like Bernadeschi suspended for Saturday, do you change it up a bit?
Yeah, we came into this phase with a clear idea of which players would take the cup minutes throughout May. I think always as a coach, your commitment is to start the best lineup, and that's part of the respect to your training and the commitment to players who are performing at the top level. So, when we're in these cycles, as you've seen, Neil, we've committed to a rotation and we've sort of committed to some lineups, um, which are more longitudinal. And this lineup has been part of that plan. So there's players that have been waiting for minutes in this competition and will be given that opportunity. And there are things that we're just dealing with circumstantial, whether that, like you've said, I think it's a good call out with Bernadeschi's suspension. We need to keep him moving. So you'll see him in the roster tomorrow. And again, I think part of the process as well, you think of Lorenzo returning back to play. So, there's a high chance he's on the roster tomorrow as well. And then ultimately there'll be some TFC2 call-ups. We'll continue giving some of the young players opportunity that can ensure we can maintain the rest, recovery, and rotation, as well as fill the gaps for some of our injuries.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Go John next.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, John. Thanks for taking time to speak to us. It's your second look at CS Saint Laurent. From a tactical perspective, and considering they're down 3 goals, I mean, what are you expecting from them tomorrow?
Well, I think they can just play with no fear. I said last time going into that home match they had, I felt it would have been difficult, but it's also challenging for them. They would have probably played with that expectation, and I think that's not always easy when you play those home matches and everyone's turning up to see you. So I just feel like they'll play a lot freer. Maybe the opportunities they had and they didn't quite take, they'll not be as tight. They've experienced it once before. They know we're only human, and they've seen that in the first leg. So I imagine they'll come in with some confidence and I guess that pressure off, just to go and not enjoy the occasion, because I think they'll genuinely believe that if they score one, they can score two, and that's the dream that I know I'd be trying to create with my players. So I expect them to come in excited, full of confidence, and I guess with no real weight of expectation, which maybe they had in that first game.
We'll have James next.
Thanks, Nick. Hey, John.
Hey, James.
You guys have a nice lead from that first leg going into the second one, but given that freedom that you mentioned you expect from Saint Laurent, how important is this first goal going to be on Tuesday?
Yeah, I think it's really important for them. I think if they're able to get that goal first, they'll just buoy them, I'm sure. I think for us, as I've said to the players, coming into this one, we're at home, fans will turn up. We have an identity at home. We've been working on that. We've been building consistency. Our stats are starting to show a great level of consistency across our home matches. And it's a commitment to our identity. I think that's, the process. The occasion is a cup match, and, as many would say, it's that banana skin or a chance for, those players from Saint Laurent to make a name for themselves. But for us, teams are coming to this stadium, and I think we're starting to build a lot more consistency in the identity that we've promised our fans. So it's sticking to that, James, regardless if they score first.
Go back to Neil next.
Thank you. John, I have two questions, if I may. The first is, can you give us an update on Jonathan Osorio and Kevin Long?
Yeah, I mean, both I'll be missing for the cup game. The goal is to push them back for Cincinnati. So, you know, they missed the fitness test on Saturday. We felt it was probably too high risk to bring them in, even though it was such a big game, particularly for Jonathan. And the goal has been Cincinnati. So we'll work with them this week. I don't think either of them will be in a position to start against Cincy, but we may have them in the squad. So fingers crossed they keep progressing this week and have no setbacks.
And secondly, this, I believe, is the 9th game in 31 days, and there are 2 more next week. Obviously, your sports science staff is looking after the physical side of it, but does mental fatigue come into it too when all you're doing is eat, sleeping, and playing?
Yeah, it's we had a session yesterday planned, and that session was about a group of players and getting them ready for Saint Laurent. But we took that space off. We needed to take some space because the emotional outpour, whether it was an excitement and joy or the emotion around defeat, it does carry a weight, Neil, and I'm pleased you've recognised that, because it doesn't matter what the sports science numbers suggest. I think people like Robin Gale, who work here in that mental performance space, they understand the emotional outpour. They understand the cognitive demand that's been on these players game in, game out. And so we give them some space yesterday just to breathe and reset, and it paid off today. They came in high energy, big focus. There was a lot of excitement for what's going to be a big game tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go back to John.
Thanks, Nick. John, aside from Osorio and Kevin Long, are there any new injury concerns to worry about?
No, that's the good news. I feel like we're starting to build a bit more resilience through these periods. So it's great news, John. And I said this to you, we're getting consistency now with grass. We're getting consistency with the weather. I think this is hopefully a period of time now that we can stabilize and make sure that we keep our players fit and healthy. I think we've done well during this period. Yes, we've had injuries, but I've started to notice, the squads picking up injuries as well. They're carrying a lot of injuries into games. So it's good for us to see a little bit of an ease off, but we've got Richie Laria coming back. He's on his way. Lorenzo's getting closer to full match fitness. And as I say, fingers crossed, those who are long, he'll be back this weekend. So yeah, it's getting better, John.
If you have a follow-up, if you don't mind, what is Richie's status? Could he see action either tomorrow or against Cincinnati?
It might be. I mean, tomorrow definitely not. He's just started to be in the full training, but the full training, even that's heavily modified. He is ahead of schedule, but at the same time, we're being very cautious on this one, John. Like I say, he's our DP. We just can't go without Richie now for another half a season. So we'll ease this one in, and he could see the bench for Cincy. He could see the bench for that. I could see a world where he might be on our bench for Cincy, but I think more realistic, we're looking at Philly and beyond. So we'll see how this week plays out. We're learning every day about what his limitations are and how he's pushing. And we've got to remember he's been out for such a long time. So we've pushed him. There's been a little bit of soreness popping in as well. So we got to really be careful on this one.
And we'll go back to James.
Thanks again, Nick. John, you touched on this a little bit before the first leg regarding the tactical acumen you see in teams coming from Quebec. But seeing as you spend as much time as anybody analyzing the Canadian player pool, I was curious if there's something unique that you see in players that come from that province. I've always thought that the unique mix of cultures leads to different players coming out of there.
Yeah, I mean, I've been so impressed with, the players that you see from Montreal. I mean, Cornet for me was just a great example of, a player that's had, I guess, enough free play, enough development without coaching to create his own identity, and he's hone his skills, and a balance of engaged in coaching. And I think, there was a lot of research back in the early 2010s around, deliberate practice versus deliberate play. And I think a lot of the immigrant players that are able to come in through Quebec, they get a bit of an advantage because they aren't overcoached from a young age. They aren't, drilled with thoughts and ideas on the game. I think they're able to form their own identity and joy and passion for the game. And at times when the coaching comes in at the right time, and as I say, I think Quebec have had a really good coaching model. They've been influenced heavily by the French Football Federation, and yeah, I've always had a lot of respect for what the Quebec province have done with their players and their NTC, their full-time programming that they've had. So it's a solid place. But I thought the coaching in the last game was outstanding. I thought the conditions were well managed by Saint Laurent. I thought they did a terrific job, and I thought the coaching team just knew how to get the best out of their players while getting their players to play with no fear. I thought it was a proper cup tie. It was a nervy one for us, that's for sure.
Go back to Neil.
Thanks, Nick. Forgive me, John. I have two more questions. One, you said you'd given the players a break. Did you give yourself a break yesterday? Did you sleep in, take the day off?
That's funny. Yeah, I did. This was the first one. It's the first one. My wife and daughter were up this weekend, so yeah, we watched the Newcastle game together. So I don't know if it was. Then I watched my son's Whitecaps game. Oh man! So I don't know if that's a break or not, but we watched a little bit of football together and managed to get out for a bite to eat, which was nice. Yeah.
Good, nice to hear. And secondly, as you know, Saint Laurent has quite a few players who have played futsal at the highest level, like Quemi and other players. Do you notice that, their ability on close contact with the ball? Does futsal influence come in any way?
Yeah, I think our players were surprised at their technical competency. And it was a tough pitch, a really tough pitch to play on. So I think even on Toronto's pitch, these guys are going to shine. I think it's going to be a real good opportunity for some of these players to put their hand up for the Canadian Premier League, and maybe even to be knocking on, MLS Next Pro, knocking on the MLS doors here. It's a big opportunity. I was impressed with. There was at least three of those players I thought showed, like you've said, Neil, a level of technical ability where you were like, oh, okay. When the level was increased, they were able to show they can reach a certain standard. And futsal does help. There's no doubt. There's again a lot of research in that multi sort of sport approach, but involves footballs. So I think futsal, particularly in those younger years, does provide a technical edge to a lot of players. So you're right to flag that. I do think, as I say, there's a lot of good things happening in Quebec. I just feel like at some point you want to hope that they can grab a Canadian Premier League team or a MLS Next Pro team just to try and widen the opportunities for the players. But that's not for us. That's for Canada, you know. If I had my old hat on, I might have been pushing that agenda. I've probably got to keep my mouth shut now as a Toronto FC coach.
And we'll go to James for the final question.
Two last ones, if there's time for that. John, it was an impressive performance on the weekend against Montreal. I'm curious if you saw something new in your side this weekend, maybe a little bit of an extra attacking edge, a little bit of ruthlessness that maybe we hadn't seen before.
Well, it's interesting because the statistics for that game, we were talking about the consistency. We had very similar stats to the Atlanta game, very similar stats to New York. And so if you actually overlaid those games on top of each other, statistically from an XG point of view, etc., our aggression, which you can measure, there's a lot of things you can measure where you'd say, okay, we're starting to get that home identity consistency. What's changing for us, James, I think, is the consistency in our squad. You know, I think that the more that we get, you know, core players playing together, but also what you'd call sub-core players who are now pushing to be core players, understanding the tactics, we're getting more comfortability around an identity and a style of play. We started the preseason into the season, as I said this to anyone that'll listen, we were getting some real clarity in our style of play, and it was building. And then we just had this period where we were losing so many players, so many different partnerships, no DPs, up one DP. Yeah, it was interesting period. But I thought what we balanced well this week, which I was hoping to see, was that the crossing threat, which we've seen from Tyrese Spicer, which led to, I guess, Matty Longstaff's goal, and the inside to outside threat from Lorenzo, where him and Fede, you know, can find them on that opposite rhythm. So I think, like I say, we were trying to develop that in the first part of the season, but we had, you know, two left footers on the same side. We hadn't had Spicer flying in and out as a wing back. We were using Jaquil and Lorenzo together. So there's some things changed in the dynamic and the makeup of our squad, but I think what I've seen is we're starting to get consistency with more quality on the pitch and guys who are developing confidence, like Prince and Spice, bringing Lorenzo back in. Matty Longstaff's confidence is there. Davy Flores' confidence is coming in his role. Yeah, I think you're seeing the beginning of the moving to this next level, which is what we said phase 4 had to be about. We had to start to reach another level in our tactical excellence. So, you know, the stats are showing that. I think this week we moved from 13th, end of phase 3 with 13th in the XG differential. We moved to 9th this week in MLS out of the 30 odd teams. So we're progressively getting closer to where we want to be.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And the last one is, you know, with TFC2, we've seen a bunch of external or non-academy recruits come into the group this year. And it's not unusual or anything new, but I'm curious how you view that potential of bringing guys into the situation and getting them used to the system and seeing them plug maybe holes that you see in the first team academy pathway.
Yeah, I think we, you know, our academy pathway is obviously shown that it can produce players. Jaquil, you know, DeAndre, Kosi Thompson, Kobe Franklin, etc., Luka Gavin. You know, you've seen guys come through. It's exciting, and in the right conditions, you're starting to see these players thrive. You know, to watch the uplift from those players in the last 6 months, from probably not having a great amount of confidence to, you know, scoring, assisting in big games. It's been really cool to see. And I think, you know, that'll continue. Toronto is a hotbed for talent, I've got no doubt. And, you know, Anthony Capitosto and his team will keep finding the talent and retaining the talent, which is a big one for Toronto. And that means our academy has to operate at the standards, you know, comparable with anywhere else in MLS or Europe. And I think they do a good job of that. But for us, bringing the other players in, you know, what I've learned is, you know, our playing model is very deliberate and specific, while we're bridging the first team playing model across TFC2 and the U19s. That's Terry Dunfield's. One of his key jobs is this bridging strategy. There are players that have formed in clubs that may have that back five, back three, 3-4-3, 3-5-2 development frameworks where they've done thousands of hours in those roles and are more first team ready. So, that's been definitely one of our strategies, to look at some of the clubs that typically operate in their development phases, sort of U16 to U21, where they're operating out of a similar playing model. So Nixon Gomez would be a good example of that. Charlie Stanland, Hassan, those players are players we've seen that fit more to the profiles that we're looking for as we we influence the development pathway and build on some of the great work from Anthony Capitosto and his team.